Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Examined Life, Gen Z Engages Philosophy, the podcast series where we take a closer look at life's biggest questions through the lens of philosophy, spirituality, and modern culture. I'm your host, Delara, and together we'll share and explore how Gen Z is redefining these timeless topics in our rapidly changing world. In today's episode, we're delving into a topic that feels more relevant than ever: forgiveness. What does it mean to forgive in a world shaped by cancel culture? How do faith, healing, and accountability intersect when we've been hurt or wronged? To help us navigate these questions, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Jennifer Wortham, a research associate at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program and author of A Letter to the Pope, The Keeper of the Nest. Dr. Wortham's work touches on some of the most challenging and transformative aspects of forgiveness, faith, and healing. Today, we'll discuss how her personal story and professional research intersect, the role of forgiveness in a hypercritical culture, and why it's vital to embrace human flourishing in the face of adversity. Let's settle in and deep dive into the examined life.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Wortham, and I am at Harvard as a research associate focusing on the intersection of religion, spirituality, and health outcomes. I'm doing a lot of research on adverse childhood experiences and moral injury and trauma and how those things impact people across the life course. My background is as a public health professional. I have a doctorate in public health from UCLA and been working in the field of public health for about 30 years in various roles in administration and strategy. I've also done a lot of work as a consultant. And I have a very personal interest in the topic of adversity in childhood because of my brother's experience with abuse in the Catholic Church. Both of my brothers were abused by our parish priest when they were young boys. So I launched a campaign several years ago to find ways to bring healing and really bring peace for people who have experienced clergy abuse. And that evolved into a global campaign to get a United Nations World Day passed and to prevent child sexual abuse. And we were successful. So that day was passed in November of 2022. And now the annual World Day on the prevention and healing of child sexual abuse is celebrated on each November 18th. And this year will be our third commemoration. So we're really honored to have been able to accomplish that. And I'm here today with Delara. She's going to be asking me some questions about my journey and really my work with the Catholic Church since both discovering my brother's abuse and then deciding to reconcile with the Catholic Church back in 2016. So thanks for having me, Delara.
Thank you. You've done some really powerful work, and it's really, I think, inspiring for a lot of people who have a voice or a story and that they want to be heard. And speaking of stories, I recently read your story, A Letter to the Pope, The Keeper of the Nest, and it was amazing and really powerful. And I really enjoyed reading the letters actually themselves inside the story. I thought that was kind of a good way for me to feel kind of the connection and maybe what you were feeling in the moment when you were writing the letters. And I wanted to kind of ask something about the story and also in terms of forgiveness, because I know a lot of your work is centered around the idea of forgiveness. And I think that idea is really relevant in current times and in kind of today's world of, cancel culture and everything that kind of disregards forgiveness. And so I wanted to know, how did your understanding of forgiveness evolve throughout your journey of processing your family's trauma and how that maybe inspired you as you were writing your story?
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you for taking time to read my book. I think forgiveness especially in relationship to forgiving an organization or an institution that has really caused a lot of harm in one's family can be a very loaded question. And I've had a lot of people say, well, how can you forgive, the church or an institution that caused so much harm to so many people? I've had questions about, well, is it really your role to forgive? What about your brothers? And I said, every person that's been impacted in any way by something that's been wrongly done to them, or done through neglect, they have their own losses that they have to work through, and ultimately decide if they want to reconcile with the party that wronged them or not. So for me, yes, I did have a role in being hurt in the church. I was very devout Catholic, and grew up with my grandparents in the Catholic Church. And when we learned about my brother's abuse, it destroyed my family. And we had already experienced a lot of trauma in my family. We had, my mom experienced domestic violence. And when I was little, we moved a lot of times. And then my mom remarried and my stepfather died a few years later. And so we had a very traumatic childhood. And this kind of was I would say, not the icing on the cake. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. It just completely devastated my family, because during all the hard times that we had, really, my mom and I, the only thing we had to hang on to was, the foundation of our church and the relationship with our church. And when we found out what happened to my brothers, both of my brothers' lives had kind of gone down a bad path, and they both really struggled. One of my brothers passed away this last year at the age of 57 from long-term effects of cancer and mental health problems. The other brother is really struggling with his mental health, and he's had a couple of suicide attempts. So, the impact of the abuse on my family was really profound. It wasn't just we learned about it and we got over it. It changed everything about my family. We no longer celebrated holidays together. We all left the church. It kind of left us just feeling untethered and like, where do we belong and who are we? It had been such a big part of our lives and our culture. And also my mom experienced a lot of guilt and shame as a mother, not protecting her sons. I, as the older sister, felt guilt and shame. And I grappled with that and those feelings for a long time. And so the forgiveness of the church wasn't something that I did that was just, one day after decide to forgive them. It was a long time of consideration and wanting to make sure that the church was accountable, but at the same time, finally realizing that that they didn't intentionally come out and hurt us, right? They intentionally protected themselves from the lawsuits and the things that people were trying to hold them accountable for. And they, they did their best, but they thought they were doing it to protect the church and to protect the people in the church. In the end, what they did is they ended up hurting the people that the church was supposed to be protecting in the first place. So it was a long time in coming, and I really went through a whole process of trying to reconcile, how do I deal with the church? How would my family feel if I reconciled with the church? But it had been something that had weighed on me for such a long time, the institutional betrayal, that I kind of felt I had to come to terms with it. So in 2015, after seeing Pope Francis speak about the clergy abuse issue and seeing his remorse and hearing that he was establishing a commission to really try to support victims and survivors and to prevent this in the future, I felt like it was finally time, that there was finally a leader that I believed would take it seriously, that I could follow.
Wow. So I feel like your view is more, at times, though the institutions can be flawed, it's more the focus of like why the institution is operating and its purpose and, the impact that it has had on so many people, the positive impacts, know. And I think that's powerful that you were able to kind of take a bird's eye view and look at it like that, instead of taking, the personal route and how it has negatively impacted people and just focusing on, like mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that probably is a huge part of forgiveness.
It is, yeah. And so, since I went through that process, I've done a lot of research trying to understand the literature on forgiveness. And you're absolutely right. And it's very astute that you saw through my long diatribe on what had happened and where I landed. And one of the key things in forgiveness is what they call perspectives, really understanding the perspectives of the individual who maybe harmed you or hurt you, so that it's not necessarily so personalized or taken so personally, but you can step back and look at it from a higher level. And it's very difficult to do. It takes time, because at the time when you're going through something, it feels very personal. Mm-hmm. And yet, when I look back, the church it supports so many people in so many ways. And I didn't want to ever see the church destroyed. I just wanted it to be accountable to what happened to my family and many, many families like mine. Another part of the perspective taking is at the time, they didn't realize how much damage that people who had been abused were going to suffer from. They didn't realize how traumatic this was and how it destroyed so much of the individual's life and their family's life. And so at the time they were operating at kind of within ignorance. Mm-hmm. And so I also, have to forgive that, because the fact is that they didn't know. So, again, it's not something I don't think they intentionally went out and said, oh, we're going to hurt families. We're going to hurt people that come to pray every week. And so that when you really step back from that standpoint, it's kind of like, how can you not forgive?
Mm-hmm. And I think that takes a lot of maturity and, understand, having a sense of understanding of more than just yourself and your own feelings, which is hard for people. But I think that's really beautiful that you were able to do that. And I also because sometimes forgiveness gets kind of discussed alongside the concept of justice. And I don't think that they're maybe the same thing. And I wanted to ask how you see forgiveness and justice and how you believe they should interact in kind of addressing harm.
Also a really good question. So they are very separate and they're not mutually exclusive. So when you think about wrongdoing, whether it's intentional or not intentional, our system of justice says that if you do something wrong, then you need to make reparations, right? And it's kind of a central tenet of what it is to be in a society, is that justice means that you try and work your best to restore what's happened to somebody. And so my challenge with justice is that there is no justice for losing your family, for losing a childhood, for all the years of suffering that my family went through, my grandparents, and the guilt and shame, and my grandmother died with great remorse and grief in her heart that I couldn't comfort. And I did my best, but she really felt that because she brought the priest into our home, that she was responsible, and that my brother's souls, their souls were in jeopardy, because if they couldn't themselves let go and forgive and turn their lives around, that they would end up in purgatory, is what she thought. And she died with that on her mind. My brother Michael, he died in grief, and because his son had not talked to him in 3 or 4 years because he's got mental health issues, and it broke his heart. And so those are difficult things to overcome. And to me, there's no justice for that. In terms of you can't go back and repair those things. It's got to be a go forward strategy for me. I've talked to so many survivors around the world who pursued their persecutors or the people that hurt them, and they never were able to get a conviction, or they never were able to get the authorities to even file, or go after the predators, because they didn't have enough evidence or whatever. And it causes them to, be really angry because they didn't get justice. And so for me, for a lot of people, justice is important. But for me, it's really about acknowledging and accepting and understanding where that party is and party that hurt you. And in a way, almost letting go of the need for justice. And hope for me, turning it over to God. God will ultimately hold people accountable. And I don't know what's in those people's hearts. I don't know if they are remorseful or if they truly want to do something but can't and restricted for some reason. Or so I had to let go because I couldn't find any means of justice. And for the past, what brought me myself to a sense of peace and justice is that, initially the church did not support, the World Day. They said, oh, people can go off and do their own World Day. It's not for us to decide or to do anything about it. And at the end, they spoke at the United Nations after the vote. They read a letter from the Holy Father saying that he fully supported the World Day. And for me, that was justice. That's not in the book because it happened way after the book was published, but to have the church actually speak to the Holy Father, at the United Nations to recognize the World Day after working so hard to get it established and everything, that for me was in some sense of justice, but it's a go forward thing. It's for the future for people. Now, every year there is a World Day that survivors can rally around and hopefully get help and be supported. And that's, from now until eternity. So at least for eternity, as long as the UN is in existence. So for me, that's justice, but it doesn't repair anything for my family. It didn't help my family. When my one brother still passed away, although he did get to see the first World Day. So I was happy he got to meet the Pope. And it brought him some sense of satisfaction, but nothing to make up for the years that they suffered.
Yeah. So I think justice, maybe like understanding that doesn't really like do what kind of accepting forgiveness does for you. It doesn't provide you with the same, it might be like a momentary satisfaction, but it's not the same impact that really comes to you. And I think that's obviously an amazing thing that World Day ended up being kind of what provided you with a good feeling after everything. So
and it was only because I forgave and because I figured out how to work with the church that we were able to get it accomplished and to let it go, and to know that I don't know, having a World Day, I don't know how many people it's going to impact in the long run or how that's going to change the world in the future. It didn't change the past, but hopefully it can have an impact. And for me, that's the only justice I can ever expect is that there was meaning to what happened to my family, but it doesn't take away there's the pain, the suffering, and it's not necessarily enough to heal them, but for me, it's there. And then what was really interesting, people say, well, are you happy about the World Day thing? No, I'm not happy because I had to deal with really tragic things every day and hearing people's stories. And it was for me, a lot of time and sacrifice to get it done. And how can you ever be happy about creating a World Day about something that is so tragic in our world? So I was not happy. I was satisfied that we were able to accomplish it. And I wish I never would have had to do that work because I could have been doing other things with my life for 2 years. But so yes, to me, justice and forgiveness are very different things. And our society and our world should hold people accountable. The church needs to repair whatever they can. They need to be accountable for the mistakes they made. But it's not up to me to do that, to hold them accountable. It's not, there's nothing I can do to hold them accountable.
And I think people assume that, I guess in a way it's true that justice is seen as kind of the easier route, whereas forgiveness can be a lot more difficult. But I think that, like, in the way that you described forgiveness, in the long run, it is what should feel easier because, you know, it's something that you kind of cultivate within yourself rather than all the work that you had to put in to, you know, achieve World Day, which I think is an amazing thing for all the people that it has impacted.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to sort of ask, for other people who maybe think, I don't think I could ever forgive this institution or this person, or people struggling with figuring out how to forgive, do you think it's something that can be like taught or cultivated, or is it just something that naturally emerges from personal experience, kind of gaining the ability to forgive?
So that's a really good question too. So the Human Flourishing Program, and this is actually how I got to Harvard, has an initiative around forgiveness that is led by kind of a world-renowned researcher named Everett Worthington. He was for a long time a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. He's now emeritus, and so he developed an intentional practice for forgiveness and how you can help people come to forgiveness, and to try to bring forgiveness to the world. You know, that's his specialty. And when I was writing my book back in 2016 and 17, I wanted to address forgiveness in the right way. I didn't want to send people down a bad path. And so I started doing research, like who was doing work in forgiveness field. And I found him and reached out to him, and he was really kind, and he shared with me his resources. And initially I was going to have a workbook inside my book, but the publisher said, no, that doesn't fit. Let's you can do another workbook and do that separate. And so in my conversations with him, he told me about working with Harvard on the Human Flourishing Program. And I had always wanted to come to Harvard my whole life. And I asked him to get me connected, and he did. And I was able to meet the director, Tyler Vanderwill. And ultimately, they accepted me to come in to do research in the program, which was a really big honor for me. And so as I learned more about the process of forgiveness, there is a lot of work around intentionally forgiving and teaching people how to be more forgiving in their lives. For my own process, I've never been somebody to really hold a grudge. You know, I've kind of always, I was just, maybe it's my Christian faith and my Christian traditions was taught to be forgiving. This was a big lift, though, forgiving the church. And I'll say that it was something that didn't happen intentionally. It was something that kind of started to percolate, and I was really like a calling. It was like I felt a really deep calling to come back and to the church and to do something. And that's the best way I can explain it. It was a calling. It was like a vocation. And so as I really think about the process that I went through, for me, it was more of a divine healing. It was like God was reaching in and helping to heal my heart and to show me a way that could help to heal other people. And that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing now. And all my work at Harvard is around adversity and suffering and how do we bring healing to people. And I never would have been in this place had I not forgiven the church and written that book. I think the book is what got me into Harvard. So, but it wasn't something I sat down and said, "Oh, I'm going to forgive the church today," and I didn't go learn how to do it. It did just come to me. But there are methods and ways. So Everett Worthington's program is called The Path to Reach Forgiveness. And there's a website about it, and it takes people through the steps. It's mostly designed for facilitated forgiveness. So for like a therapist or a counselor to help somebody through the process, but it's all based on evidence on what works and what doesn't work in terms of helping somebody to forgive. And it's been very effective. So I think it can happen either way. I think you can come to it yourself. It can be a part of your own healing journey. And it can be kind of divinely inspired, or it can be intentional, where you decide, I need to be a more forgiving person, or I need to have forgiveness in my life. And you can take classes and learn how to do that.
I think that's probably really comforting for a lot of people to know that, it's not something you just have to naturally one day feel. It's something that you can gradually learn and kind of become someone who is a more forgiving person, which I think not seen as much. I think in my generation, at least, forgiveness is less and less normalized in a lot of scenarios. It takes, obviously, like you said, a lot of time and a lot of understanding of things to ultimately forgive. But the fact that it's not necessarily like you can learn how to do it, I think that's really important to know and really impactful.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to end off kind of with what advice you would give to young people who are struggling with the ideas of trust and forgiveness in today's kind of fast-paced and judgmental world. What would you kind of tell them?
Well, I think trust and forgiveness are kind of two separate concepts that I would have people reflect on. So trust is something that is earned, and it's important that people use their judgment when they're engaging with somebody and deciding how much to trust that person. And it's kind of a sacred thing, right? And when trust is broken, it's hard to repair. It doesn't mean that you can't forgive the person. So you can forgive somebody and still never see them again, right? You can go through a process of not wishing them harm, because ultimately forgiveness is really just about not wishing somebody harm, just letting it go, right? It doesn't mean that you have to reconcile with them. It doesn't mean you have to ever see them again. But what you want to do is just let it go and be able to not carry that burden with you. If trust is broken, then and you want to repair the relationship, you have to go beyond, just the forgiveness part, but then you have to figure out how do you rebuild that trust again. And in relationships that I've had where somebody broke my trust, right? You're scared. Are they going to do it again? And it took me time to trust the church, to wonder if, they would do it again. And then I sat back and I said, well, the church is made up of millions of people, right? And so, who is it I'm going to hold accountable? Is it the institution? Well, institutions are inherently broken. I mean, institutions are run by people. Everybody has a different agenda. So if I was to step back and say, do I trust the church in general? It's like, well, who in the church do I trust, right? And so I have met many people in the church that I do now trust, and there's other people that I don't trust. And those people earned my trust because they showed up and they did what they said they were going to do, and they were intentional about supporting my family and wanting to see the healing for us. And so I trust them. But can I say I trust the entire institution? No, there are plenty of people that have agendas and that didn't follow through and didn't do what they were supposed to do. So you have to be discerning. And that's the difference with trust and forgiveness. I forgive them all. I forgive them. Like either they're ignorant or they were misinformed, or, they felt like they were doing the right thing by protecting the church. So I forgive the acts of what happened, but trust is something that takes time and they have to earn. And so I think for young people, take your time when you're trying to learn to trust somebody or something, and, don't set them up for failure. But, give a little bit of an olive branch at a time, and then just see how it goes. And also understand that if you use the perspectives, that they may not be intentionally meaning to hurt you or fail you. They just may not have the competencies or the resources or the capabilities to follow through, even though their intentions are pure. And so I came up with a saying a long time ago that was pretty much, don't judge by people by their actions, judge them by their intentions. Because actions are, easy to break, but intentions, that's what really is the essence of the soul. And so wait until you understand intentions, and if somebody intentionally tried to exploit you or use you or hurt you, you need to be discerning and step back. You can forgive them, but it doesn't mean you'll ever trust them again.
Yeah. Oh, that's very powerful. Actions, not intention. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to judge their action. Like, okay. And don't judge them when somebody acts out a certain way. Don't judge them by saying, well, they're a bad person. You have to discern. Well, did they not know? Did they not understand? Did something else happen in their life and they were constrained? And so then that's where you have to use your judgment. And, if somebody is impulsive, they may have some type of disability that makes them impulsive, right? And so you don't necessarily know about that. You can't hold somebody accountable for having a disability, right? So you need to discern and take the time to discern. If somebody says they do something and they didn't, or they forgot, or they had a family emergency, you have to discern and put yourself in their place. And so that's all about perspective. So that really helps you to start to not take things so personally. At the same time, if you want to know who you can depend on and who can be there for you. And ultimately, that's a very small circle of people. That's a very small circle of people who would be willing to stand up and sacrifice their own needs for your needs. And we shouldn't always have expectations that everybody's going to do that, because they're not.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. Thank you for engaging in this conversation today. I think it was very powerful for a lot of people, and honestly for me too. Just thinking about the concept of forgiveness and how it's impacted your life, but how it can maybe impact my life more, how I can channel it more into, my everyday life. And I think that's really important for me to know, and maybe a lot of people listening. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for having me today. Of
course.
That brings us to the end of this episode of The Examined Life, Gen Z Engages Philosophy. A big thank you to Dr. Jennifer Wortham for joining us and sharing her incredible insights on forgiveness, faith, and healing. Her work reminds us that these concepts aren't just abstract ideas. They're tools we can use to navigate some of the most difficult challenges in our lives. If today's conversation resonated with you, be sure to check out Dr. Wortham's book, A Letter to the Pope, The Keeper of the Nest, and explore her work with the Harvard Human Flourishing Program. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need a little philosophical inspiration in their lives. Join us next time as we continue exploring life's big question through the eyes of Gen Z. Until then, remember Socrates' famous words: "The unexamined life is not worth living." Stay curious, stay open, and keep asking the tough questions. Take care, everyone.